Right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Keller. I'm the Senior Director of Executive Office Operations and Strategic Initiatives for the California School Boards Association, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. I'm really excited about this today because I'm a staffer for CSBA on our Artificial Intelligence Task Force with our fearless lead, Dr. Naomi Eason, who's the Chief of our Research, Education, and Policy Development Department. And through the course of our meetings with task force members who are superintendents, trustees, technology directors throughout the state, we have a 28-member task force. And through the course of those meetings and discussions, we had a lot of legal questions come up in the past year, 2 years about. So we wanted to get some of our legal experts on a webinar to answer some of those ever important legal questions and bring that perspective to our members as you all are navigating this world of artificial intelligence. So today we're going to be exploring how school boards can best prepare and protect your students and staff in this ever-evolving world of artificial intelligence tools. We'll unpack some of the prominent risks to AI in classroom and administrative settings, including the legal considerations that you're going to want to take into account. Things like protecting privacy, remaining FERPA compliant, preventing plagiarism and copyright infringement, and making sure there's accessibility for students. So today we're joined by a panel of legal experts from CSBA's partner law firms. So I'll do some quick introductions before we dive in. With us today, we have Nicholas Clair, who's a partner in Lozano Smith's Sacramento office. Mr. Clair focuses on facilities and business and local government issues for public agencies. He advises clients on a variety of transactional matters such as artificial intelligence, technology more broadly, the Brown Act, Public Records Act, Prop 218, elections law, ethics, governance, financing, CEQA, human resources. So and Nick's quite busy. So we also have with us today Alex Lozada, who's a senior counsel rather at Atkinson, Andelson, Loya, Ruud, and Romo. So Alex is a seasoned attorney who provides legal counsel to school districts, community college districts, county offices of education. He's successfully represented educational institutions in things like dismissal hearings, administrative hearings, grievance arbitrations. He's delivered trainings regarding workplace investigations and employee discipline. And he's got an understanding of the education sector that allows him to make sure his clients navigate those legal challenges with confidence. He's deeply invested in the evolving role of generative AI in education and its transformative impact on students' educational opportunities. He's delivered several presentations to administrators in which he's an advocate for adoption and implementation of policies that address the sort of the novel challenges that AI presents to educational institutions, particularly relating to issues of student privacy and ethical considerations. He emphasizes the importance of equipping educators and students with the ability to take advantage of AI's benefits while safeguarding against the potential risks involved. We also have with us today Gretchen Shipley, who chairs F3 Law's eMatters practice group. And in that role, she keeps her clients in front of the legal issues stemming from technology in today's education environment. She's a respected leader in education law and technology. Gretchen advises school districts and delivers workshops and trainings to students, to employees, district leaders, chief technology officers, and others on a nationwide scale on the promotion of cyber citizenship in the school community, issues like data privacy, school safety, cybersecurity. And she also advises clients on the acquisition process of new technology, online instruction, E-rate compliance, and all the other business aspects of school technology. And then last but not least, we have Tempestt Tatum, who's a partner with Orbach, Huff, and Henderson, a full-service education law firm that represents over 120 K-12 and community college districts throughout the state. She's deeply ingrained in the startup and technology world and is committed to assisting the firm's public agency clients as they navigate that world of AI. And with the ever-evolving landscape of AI and technology, she's committed to staying at the forefront of learning and understanding the cutting-edge AI tools and services that are being offered, and to counsel their public agency clients on the latest developments. So in addition to the technology scope of work, Tempestt also focuses her practice on facilities work, including CEQA, real estate, and land use. So we're excited to have everybody here, and we'll go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to our moderator. So those of you that have done a webinar before, this is old news. Please make sure that you're using the Q&A feature to submit your questions. So you can just hover your mouse over the Zoom window and that bar should pop up at the bottom of your screen or at the top, depending on the version you're using. We want to make sure you submit those questions using the Q&A button rather than the chat. Q&A allows our moderators to keep track of those questions and make sure that we lock knock off the ones that we've already gotten to on the webinar. So we'll answer those towards the latter half of the webinar, where we'll get into some of that Q&A. And then don't forget, after this webinar, you always get a link and any materials that are going to be shared following the webinar. So you don't need to ask that question. Yes, you will get a copy of the webinar and a link to it, so you can watch it as you see fit in your downtime. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my friend and colleague, Ann Willemssen from Crocus. Crocus has been a facilitator of that AI task force I mentioned, and we're really excited to have her here. She'll be our moderator for today. So Ann, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andrew. Hello, I'm Ann Willemssen. I'm one of the facilitators of CSBA's AI task force, and I'm also your moderator for today's webinar. As Andrew said, we are very excited to have you join us for this webinar. We're going to start by spending about 45 minutes hearing from our panel on several topics that we've already prepared, and then we will open it up for discussion for your questions, which you can submit via the Q&A feature, which Andrew just showed you in the previous housekeeping slide. So let's get started. I'm going to start with Nick. Can you help us level set as a group by briefly walking us through what AI is exactly and how it is used in school settings?
Sure. Thanks, Anne. And good morning, everybody. All right, so I'm going to give you kind of the in the nutshell level setting, as Anne said, of AI, what it is, and why it's important. And I think this is becoming increasingly critical for folks to understand, especially as you're using it, developing policies, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to cover kind of a couple of real key concepts that kind of are baseline that everybody should have some understanding of. So I'll start with large language models, kind of what we mostly think of as AI, kind of in popular usage. So I like to start with the training process, because to me that makes understanding the models make more sense. So how do you train a large language model? You start with a model. Think of it as a big equation. It has a lot of different variables in it, and they're all set to 0 to start. So in order to train our model, we give it half of a document. So you take a document, divide it in half, you give the model half the document, and you tell the model to predict the second half of the document. So the model takes the first half, feeds it into this big equation, and outputs what it thinks is the second half of the document. Then the model does what's called back propagation. So it itself, you give it the actual second half of the document. The model goes back through all its little variables, parameters, makes adjustments so that if it had been given the first half of the document again, it would correctly predict the second half of the document. So you do that over and over millions of times with the entire corpus of the internet, everything that humans have written, and you do that multiple times, actually. Over time, all those different little parameters come to not necessarily represent specific pieces of information, but kind of they function kind of like neurons in your brain, where they have associations with each other and so forth. But at the end of this training process, this is called pre-training, what you end up with is a very good document predictor. From there, you do further training, post-training to get it to answer questions that the user asks, to get it to think through things, and you do different techniques to take your base model and make it a usable model for your different purposes. So that's kind of the key here, though, is that the model, at its base, the most advanced models that we have right now are next token predictors. They predict the next word in a sentence, but that's not to say that they're just autocomplete on steroids, which they are in a sense. But through this training process, the models come to understand information and come to understand concepts, and they are very sophisticated things. Part of this that I just want to hit is that the models themselves are a black box. We do not understand how the models work. If you give it an input, it runs through this I say a model equation with parameters, but these are trillions of parameters that we're going through. And so tracing an input to an output and understanding how the model arrived at that conclusion is unknowable currently. And it's an active area of research. So it's really important to understand we don't know what's happening from input to output precisely. Other key piece to understand is that the models do not have access to a database of information. When you ask it a question, a factual question, it does not look that up. Models learn a lot like humans learn, in that if I ask you, how the American Revolution started, you don't have like an exact memory of learning that in third grade social studies class. You've come to understand that information and you have kind of a representation of your understanding of that event in your mind. That's kind of the same way these models work. They do not have exact copies of all the information that they have ingested. They have learned the concepts over time. Okay, so that's kind of LLMs in a nutshell. A couple of key things that I think are just super important to understand. One is the context window. So when you give the model your query, the model has a set limit of how much information it can take in that gets fed into that equation, and then you get your output. The context window is what's going into the model. And if you're using something like ChatGPT and you have multiple turn conversations, the model ingests that entire conversation within the context window every time. So if you've asked a question, gotten an answer, asked a question, gotten an answer, asked another question, it takes that whole conversation and then feeds that into the model. But there is a limit to how big that context window is, so the model can lose information over time. Another important concept is retrieval augmented generation. So at base, our model, like I said, has learned general information over time through this training process. So if you ask it a factual question, you just go in the ChatGPT and say, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? It knows that information just based on its training data. If you give the model a history book and then ask it that question, the model will process that information along with your query. So it's grounded in the information you're giving it within the context window. So you're going to get more accurate answers. Retrieval augmented generation is a technique where the model itself can reach out and find factual information, typically through a web search, where you'll get more factual information. So it's just important to understand what the model is doing. Is it relying on its training data? Is it grounding itself in real world knowledge? And then if it is grounding itself, what knowledge is it grounding itself in? Okay. All right, one more, just real quick, reasoning models, kind of new frontier in the last couple months. These are models that kind of just do chain of thought within themselves. If you want to know more about that, maybe we'll touch on it later. Models can use tools nowadays. Web searching is kind of a tool use, writing Python code so that models can accurately do math. And increasingly, models can interact with APIs and accomplish real world tasks, which brings me to agents, which are kind of another new frontier-ish thing, where the model, using kind of a reasoning process, can plan a course of action, execute tasks, come back to its plan of action, take into account what it's found, adjust its plan of action, take more real world actions. And this is increasingly being built into a lot of AI that you interact with, even if it's just ChatGPT or something. They are doing agentic things, and that's going to be an increasingly important thing to think about as we're interacting with AI. So that's my spiel on foundational stuff.
Thanks, Nick. Your point about this being a black box is a great tee up to one of the most common concerns we've heard from the AI task force, which is the uncertainty around data privacy in an AI environment. So Gretchen, what are the legal implications of using AI tools that collect and process student data? And how do we ensure compliance with federal and state privacy laws like FERPA?
Thank you. You hit the nail on the head. I think data privacy is the most critical legal compliance issue. And I don't think any of us want to stand in the way of innovation in education and say, don't use AI. I think we all saw the executive order from the White House last week. It said AI in education, K-12 education is critical. And so it is going to continue to come into the school community, whether it's through curriculum and instruction, lesson planning resources, or it's also coming in through the business office or used for translation services, or it's coming in through special ed for note taking. It is coming in through all facets of school operations, and how schools first ensure data privacy, have process and procedures for data privacy, but communicate that to all of your staff and not necessarily just your teachers. So I wanted to go through sort of the 3 key legal elements or the 3 key tips for ensuring data privacy. But this alone could be a 1 hour, a deep dive. But the first one I would just say is, and I think Nick was getting at this, is, as you all probably know, there is open generative AI where the data, a query is put in and it is reshared and regenerated with the universe. And that's like the free version of Chat GPT. And whether or not you have a policy that you can use AI or you can't use AI, I guarantee you, your staff and students are still using the free version of Chat GPT. So it's happening. So we need to put some guardrails and expectations around it. But so that whatever they put in is making the large language model smarter, it's being reshared. That's different than closed AI. And this is going to be a key question you're going to look at when you're evaluating your tools, the different AI tools being presented to you. Closed AI, it just stays within the school environment, and we're not as concerned about data privacy if the data is only being reshared within your school environment. It's what I'm really focusing on for data privacy is the open generative AI. And so within that, I think a very easy message to send to your staff and your students is, it's my little catchphrase, is no PII in open AI. No personally identifiable information should be going into open generative AI. And that can be, I've heard of payroll being processed through open generative AI. We have teachers taking report cards and putting them into, open generative AI to generate comments, IEPs being drafted. And you got to think that has a student's name, it has their disability status, there's all kinds of confidential information that under FERPA, you are not supposed to be resharing without parent permission. So no PII and OpenAI will at least provide that initial level of protection for everybody, that they're not putting their personally identifiable information or their student records in OpenAI where it's being reshared. So that's sort of my first baseline rule. The second one is all of your school districts have a system in place already to vet education technology resources or contracts. It could be in your IT department, it could be in your business department, but there are data privacy, federal and state standards that all of your ed tech tools are reviewed against for data privacy. However, I don't know that staff, when they see, or your teachers or whomever see a free tool, that they think that it needs to be reviewed and vetted for the same data privacy standards. But as we know, free isn't free. If it's a free tool available online, it usually is either doing targeted advertising towards the student, or it is taking the student data and could be reselling it. It's making money somehow. And so it's really important, again, as part of your professional development or getting the part of your policy, that your staff knows that all software, whether it's free or not, needs to go through your data privacy review process or your contract vetting process. So that's my tip number 2 is know what your vetting process is and make sure that's clearly communicated to everyone. And just a little plug, we have a free 5-minute video called Ask Before You App that we created with Cite that anybody can use. And the purpose is to say, hey, everybody should stop and make sure that they've asked permission before they put any software in front of students. And then finally, the last one is parent permission may be required before using open generative AI in the classroom, which is different than 99% of your current education technology. And I'll do a brief FERPA review, but it is because there is a federal data privacy law, the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act, that says the baseline rule is you cannot share a student's educational record outside of the school system without parent permission. That's the baseline rule. And then there's a bunch of exceptions. one of those, the school official exception, is where all your educational technology is found. And you can share student records with software company under that exception, so long as that software company isn't resharing it. So your student information system, let's say it's Aries. Of course, you can share a student's attendance records, their grades, everything with Aries without getting parent permission, because otherwise you'd never be able to make it function properly. The way that open generative AI is different is that it is resharing the data. So it doesn't meet the standard for that exception anymore. And so it kind of reverts back to that default position of FERPA, which is you needed parent permission. So if you're doing a classroom exercise, they're drafting an essay, they're doing something for a grade, that's their educational record. And if it's being done through open generative AI, like the free version of ChatGPT, technically the teacher was supposed to ask parent permission beforehand. And, there's easy ways to communicate that. We have form parent consent, which says things like, look, there's educational benefits there, or we've done a safety review, but here's the data that might be collected and here's how it could be shared. And you either give permission or you don't. And if that's the case, then you need to come up with, you can't force on the students. You have to have an alternative version of curriculum in the classroom at the same time. But, the data privacy, just to kind of recap, is, no PII and OpenAI, make sure all the tools are vetted and go through your vetting process. And the third is when it's open generative AI and it's student records going in there, make sure that you get parent permission when needed.
Thanks, Gretchen. Maybe we'll get some t-shirts made that say no PII and OpenAI.
Oh, let me trademark that first, please.
Yes, we'll credit you. Alex, can you give us your take on data privacy?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to add some information related to recent discussions that I've had with district administrators who are interested in implementing generative AI, but are concerned about student privacy and who have suggested a couple of, we've discussed a couple of potential solutions. First, paid subscriptions with AI vendors such as OpenAI's ChatGPT Enterprise or Claude Enterprise and Google Gemini Business, which promise a secure environment where sensitive information remains private and where information that you input won't be incorporated into the public version of the model and so forth. And then also school districts running their own local AI platforms. So first, even with paid AI subscriptions that promise enhanced privacy, there's some important considerations that we can't overlook. Despite vendor assurances about data privacy, ultimately, school districts are responsible for protecting sensitive student information and would have legitimate concerns about any gaps in transparency regarding how AI systems actually handle student data. We have to remember that FERPA and COPA are not optional. They're federal requirements that protect our students. And then here in California, we have additional obligations under SOPIPA that set an even higher bar. Also, if the AI vendor has a security breach, how many times have you received emails in the last year, month, saying that your information at XYZ big box company has been exposed in a security breach? Or if the vendor changes their data policies, and you've seen those emails come in as well, student information could be compromised. We have to remember that vendors may make promises about data retention, usage limitations, and security measures, but those vendor agreements, especially relating to privacy, need to be carefully scrutinized and reviewed. I also mentioned local AI as an alternative. So a school district might also consider running local AI or AI on the district's own servers or hardware, such that the processing of AI inputs and outputs remains on the premises. So this would give a district complete physical control over where data is stored and processed. So, if student data never leaves the district's network, the district's control over that information it's theoretically absolute. There's no third party involved. But there's some challenges involved in running your AI locally. This will require substantial computing power, meaning increased network and hardware expenses, as well as other resources and expertise, especially security, which might go beyond what many districts currently maintain or have the resources for. So while cloud-based AI systems are constantly updated, local servers are not. So that's another thing you have to think about, constantly updating them to make sure that they are up to date. These aren't impossible challenges to overcome, but a school district considering these options would need to seriously evaluate its budget and technological priorities. So all in all, regardless of how your district goes about implementing AI, best practices with regard to privacy will include, minimizing the amount of data that's shared with an AI system, having clear documented policies about what information can or should be shared. And then if you enter into agreements with AI vendors, truly reviewing and understanding the privacy policies as it relates to your privacy-related obligations. So, regardless of how exciting and efficient AI is and can be, our responsibility to protect student information remains unchanged.
Thanks, Alex. So switching gears for a second, as we all know, accessibility is paramount in public education, and AI tools present the opportunity to support that goal. But also with new tools, there are, of course, risks. So Tempestt, can you help? How can we ensure the AI tools are accessible to all students, including those with disabilities? And can you help us think about the legal requirements here? Are there any guidelines for providing accommodations or alternative formats?
Very good questions. Thank you, Anne. And you're right, accessibility is a foundational principle in public education. Education is a right, it's a civil right, and accessibility is the foremost principle of it. But it must be designed, AI has the potential to enhance access for students with disabilities, but it must be designed and implemented responsibly. Imagine if every student, regardless of ability, regardless of cognitive, sensory, or psychological issues, that they can learn in a way that's best for them. With AI, that vision is more possible, but it's also more complex and is not without risk. A real world example of the issues, of the disability issues that AI can assist with is, so when my nephew was in high school, he ended up breaking his arm and his leg, in back-to-back incidents. So he couldn't get to class, he couldn't take notes, and the school actually assigned a student to, take notes for him. And in high school, you have massive campuses, you have classes all over the place. So it was a little bit difficult for him to be able to get all the notes and everything that he was missing. But with AI, with AI tools, this would have allowed him to get the information he was missing. So there are all these tools out there, right? Like Otter AI, it'll transcribe spoken language in real time, which is helpful for note taking. So instead of having a student go from class to class, the teacher can just turn on this tool and it'll record the lesson, transcribe the notes, and then she would be able to transmit that to the student. So with all these tools, AI tools can unintentionally create barriers, but educators and administrators are crucial in ensuring that AI implementation is accessible. They should prioritize students in any type of testing and decision-making. They should plan for flexible accommodations and embed accessibility as a core element in their AI policies and practices. Educators and administrators, they may have the instinct to prohibit AI tools, but also prohibiting these tools can disproportionately affect students with disabilities. So both administrators and educators should clearly be aware how AI can enhance accessibility and how it can support equity for all students. And this includes well-articulated and clear policies that allow for these tools. And like Gretchen was saying earlier, these AI tools should be vetted. The educators and administrators should learn as much as possible about these tools and what they can do and how they can help students with disabilities. So what are some of these tools? I touched on Otter AI earlier. There's all sorts of tools out here. I'm not plugging any of them, but just to give you an example of what's out there are tools to help students with dyslexia, ADHD, and visual impairments. For example, Microsoft Immersive Reader, it reads text aloud, it breaks down syllables, it offers translation. There are personalized learning support tools that offer us tutors and help guide student thinking and support independent work. So all students who may not be learning on the same level at the same pace, they can get a more personalized approach. There are tools out there for ESL students and those with hearing loss. There are visual aid tools to make digital content more accessible to screen readers. There are reading and writing tools. There are again, there are all sorts of tools out there, but it's on the administrators and educators to just learn as much as possible about them and how they can assist their learners. So some of the risks and challenges with these tools are bias in AI models. The districts aren't the ones creating the models. So you just have to be careful to ensure that the models are adequately trained and there are no inequalities or biases built into the models. Some software aren't accessible to all students. If the tools don't follow accessibility standards, they may inadvertently exclude the students that you're trying to help. Privacy concerns that Gretchen mentioned, I won't go into too much detail because her and Alex already covered it, but that's another concern when you're inputting information into these tools. And then over-reliance on tech. The tools aren't meant to replace human support. The tools are just to be an enhancement of the student's existing education. And that human interaction is still important in education. And then I guess one of the last concerns is just ensuring that students aren't gaining an unfair advantage by using AI, which again, educators and administrators, you just have to pay close attention to make sure that isn't the case and create policies around that. So what can schools do? Again, I think AI is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. We're at the forefront of it. And educators, administrators, just need to learn as much as they can about it, learn about the tools. Even like Gretchen was saying, even if you don't think your students and staff are using it, they are. So you should just learn as much as you can and so that you can implement policies accordingly. And again, inclusive testing, any type of AI tools that you plan on using, be sure to involve students with disabilities to get their feedback. Some of the legal requirements and guidance around these AI tools. Now, I'm not a special education attorney, but there are a number of laws already on the books about ADA compliance. For example, Section 504 prohibits discrimination and requires equal access to programs and services. And Section 508 ensures everyone has access to information and services on the internet. So these policies already require that students with disabilities are already able to access education in the way that's best for them, just like accessing textbooks or glasses or other assistive devices. So Senate Bill 1288 required the California superintendent to convene a working group to evaluate AI-enabled teaching and learning practices. So it sounds like CDE will be coming out with their own guidance and policies surrounding AI's use in the classroom. And so we'll just have to keep a lookout on what their policies and guidelines entail. One of the other laws I wanted to just mention, there's a federal law that's going to be implemented in April 2026 or 2027 based on the population that requires all government agencies to make documents accessible to everyone. So if a school district or a county or a city is uploading documents, they have to make it accessible to everyone, including people with disabilities. So AI could be deployed to help school districts meet those requirements as well. So lastly, just want to again say, accessibility is a human right, it's a civil right, and especially in education, and AI could be at the forefront of making that a reality for everyone.
Thanks, Tempestt. You mentioned not replacing human support in all of this, and I thought that was a great segue to our next topic, which is chatbots and AI agents. I know our panelist was very eager to highlight some of the interesting legal questions that arise from students interacting with non-humans, but in a way that feels very human-like. So Gretchen, let's start with you. How would LEAs navigate the legal liabilities posed by chatbots?
Yeah, so I think chatbots, because of the direct engagement with students and the school district's duty to monitor and supervise students, creates a real challenge for how school districts comply with their duty to monitor and supervise. And yet there's this, endless engagement that a student might have with the chatbot. So the AI tools, we've all experienced this, where you go to interact with a business or a company and you end up engaging with chatbot. I'll share an experience I worked on for the state of California. The Student Aid Commission wanted to roll out a chatbot, or they did, statewide to high school seniors to enroll in the FAFSA, the financial aid form. And so every high school senior was given the opportunity to have a chatbot on their phone to ask questions and engage about science with FAFSA. They said that it was emotionally intelligent. Now, I have a high school senior boy. I feel like the words emotional intelligent is an oxymoron. Like, these kids are engaging with an emotionally intelligent AI chatbot, and there was no guardrails as to what the content could be about. And my concern, I read through the 91 pages of terms and conditions, which no school district has the bandwidth to do that. And that's why it's important to have these overarching process and procedures for vetting in place. But going through this chatbot and working with the software company, there was no guardrails. They could write anything. And so my concern from a legal standpoint is, it says, "Good morning, Gretchen. How you feeling today? You gonna fill out your college applications or the FAFSA?" And I say, "No, I feel terrible. I'm so angry at my boyfriend, I could shoot him. I'm gonna come to school and bring my gun today." Whatever. If there is any threat of self-harm, or I'm feeling terrible about myself, I want to hurt myself. If the district knows or should know that, someone's going to hurt themselves or come to school and commit violence, and the district was the one that deployed that tool into the hands of students, there needs to be some level of monitoring. And that is where, the devil's in the details from a legal standpoint. It's easy for us to say, yeah, your lawyer should review every tool, but if it's not us, you just make sure that these chatbots have we limited that chatbot, by the way. We reviewed it before it went out to say, just engage in conversations about the FAFSA. And if it's outside the scope of the FAFSA, it gets elevated to a school counselor. We also went in there and put in language about, what is your threat monitoring protocol? Is it done by the software company? How do they notify the district? Who at the district is responsible for receiving those threats? If it's your tech team, do they know how to escalate? Are they trained in threat assessment? But that's where, and then the other thing I want to point out is, a lot of times they will sign off on any liability. Oh, and if we fail to detect a threat and we fail to notify you, we're not responsible for it. And as a lawyer, all of us would go in and probably change that language. And then the similar analysis applies. I know we're talking about chatbots. All the mental health tools that are being delivered to students online, a lot of them have AI monitoring for threat assessment. And so that same concept of threat assessment and the importance of having a robust monitoring, robust liability language, I just can't encourage enough, because I think we care about student safety, first and foremost, but there's also this massive legal liability associated with it if there's going to be some harm to a student and the district could have caught it or should have caught it and didn't.
Thanks, Gretchen. Tempestt, you have a particular take on the AI agent component of this, which is different than chatbots. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so AI agents are different from chatbots. So chatbots is sort of a call and response. You put in a question and it gives you a specific response. AI agents are a little bit different because they can make decisions, they can perform tasks, they can adapt to its environment without human intervention, and to automate a broader range of tasks with minimal supervision. So in the education setting, there are a couple tools out there, Magic School, School AI, Notebook LM, that can analyze a student's performance, tailor content, pacing to meet different needs. They can also streamline administrative tasks for administrators, like grading, scheduling, attendance tracking, lesson planning. But there are pros and cons of using these. So some of the pros are that they can personalize content to teach each student on its own journey. So it can adapt without prompt. It can take, the student's grades and learning and history and adapt its own lesson plan for that particular student. Efficiency, again, reducing administrative burdens, real-time feedback instead of a teacher spending, days to grade a paper. The AI can give real-time feedback in some of these software. And accessibility, again, it caters to diverse learning, those with disabilities. It has enhanced features, text-to-speech, speech-to-text, and different adaptive technologies. And some of the risks are ones we've talked about, of course, the data privacy, although some of the software are more personalized, but still you have to ensure that whichever software you're using, it is completely enclosed, because it's so personalized, it heavily relies on collecting and analyzing data. And then the digital divide, some of the software is extremely expensive to personalize for specific students, for specific programs, for specific schools. So it could be cost prohibitive for school districts to use some of these tools. And then bias, again, talked about that earlier, but just, making sure that the algorithms and data aren't perpetuating existing biases in educational systems that would affect student outcomes. And so this will require maybe regular audits, making sure there's diverse data inputs, just, to make sure that there aren't any biases in the software that you're using. And then misinformation, false information, where are they pulling where is the AI agent pulling the data from? Just, ensuring, that the educators and administrators are understanding that. And then again, the reduced interactions between students and teachers, because the AI agent is more autonomous. There could be more of a reduced interaction between students and teachers if the AI agent is doing everything. If the AI is, giving the feedback and preparing a lesson plan, things that that the teacher and student would typically interact on, the AI is taking over. So you just have to be mindful of that if you're using these tools. And again, just schools and, you just have to make sure you're implementing robust safeguards, and reviewing the policies, with your attorneys and, your administrators to make sure that the software is, in fact, safe for your students to use.
Thanks, Tempestt. Nick, can you tell us maybe high level how we might think about our responsibilities on this now that Gretchen and Tempestt have laid this out?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of a soapbox of mine, and what I think is going to increasingly be a major liability issue for anybody using AI. Obviously, school districts too. So responsibility, kind of broad category, and what I mean is kind of the bucket of over-reliance issues. So we've talked about a lot of the more common issues that we've been dealing with for the last couple of years. But over-reliance type issues, I think, are going to be increasingly relevant, and for a couple of reasons. Like, the AI models themselves are increasingly more powerful and smarter, and they do a better job at what they're doing. It's mind-blowing to look back at GPT-4 from 2 years ago versus what we have now. So that's kind of, and the agentic kind of use cases that Tempestt was talking about is also a big issue. And two is just more people are using it. Kind of the stigma of using AI has gone away in a lot of ways. People are using it more in their daily workflows. So there's more people using more powerful models, which creates kind of a bucket of new challenges. So kind of in the bucket of over-reliance issues, there's things like as you use these models more and you get good results based on the questions you're asking and the work you're putting in front of it, you come to trust, rightly, the models more and delegate more of your work to them, and you're tempted to check them less. So that's just kind of the basic over-reliance issue. There's kind of an AI bias issue, which is separate from the regular AI bias issue. I'll just call it automation bias, where you're using an AI model, it gives you an answer, you question that based on your judgment, but then you think the AI model is smarter than me. And so you let the AI's judgment override your own judgment based on this kind of history of the model has been right before, I'm going to trust it. That's an issue. Skill degradation, just kind of relying on the AI more over time, gives you less practice in doing the things that you do, and kind of you start to lose your expertise over time. Kind of sycophancy is kind of a new, so as the AI models have gotten increasingly powerful, they've saturated the benchmark. So the way we test models to see how smart they are everybody's scoring 90%. So there's always an increasing the need to create new benchmarks. One of those benchmarks is kind of a kind of user experience benchmark, where the basic way it works is users are given kind of a blind, Pepsi challenge. They ask a question of a chatbot, they get 2 answers, they don't know what model it comes from. And so the users select which model they thought did a better answer. And that leaderboard has kind of become super important in the AI world. And what it's led to is labs developing models to do well on that leaderboard. And to do well on that leaderboard, you need to please humans. So OpenAI just in last week released a new version of GPT-4o that just agrees with you like you wouldn't believe, calls you a genius for any question or observation you make. And it is bad to the point that OpenAI just announced that they are rolling it back today or yesterday, I think, because the problem is, 1, it's annoying, and 2, it has a tendency to reinforce whatever you're saying. So if you are giving it bad ideas, or you're going down a train of thought that's not useful or that's harmful, the model will not challenge you, because the model's been trained to make you happy so that the model will do better on these leaderboards. So it's kind of the bucket of kind of interaction things that are going to, and so just briefly kind of failure points here. So we all know hallucinations, we know bias in AI and the training data itself. But as you're using these models, they may misunderstand the questions you're asking, or they may weigh the different factors of a decision you're making differently than you intended. They may be working with bad data. Like if you give the model data and it's not what it's off point, you may get bad results. Losing context, I was talking about the context window. So all of these are kinds of areas where you need to be paying attention to what the model is doing, or the model is going to give you bad results. And if you're over reliant on the AI system, that's generally going to lead to potential liability issues. And I think that's going to be an increasing issue. And just real quick, the analogy I like is autopilot. Commercial airlines using autopilot over time. And what that led to was a lot of issues eventually into the 90s and 2000s of pilots, one, skill degradation because they became over-reliant on autopilot, which necessitated training and actual flight time more. And 2, a real emphasis in the regulations on pilots understanding the autopilot systems that they're using, how to set them correctly. And we got like a whole spiel on that, but I know where we are. So, but I think there's a lot of lessons to learn there as you're developing policies and as you're thinking about how you're implementing AI, to be thinking about keeping the human in the loop, making sure the humans understand what is happening with the model so they can properly monitor how it's being used. And there's a lot of interesting problems coming ahead in that area. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Nick. So let's move for a second from more of the theoretical space, although you've given a lot of great specific examples. Let's talk a little bit about lawsuits. So Alex, can you tell us more about current lawsuits in the K-12 space as it pertains to AI, and what those cases tell us about protecting all students and district employees from future harm?
Sure, yeah, thanks. I'd like to talk about 3 recent lawsuits which show that districts might face legal exposure if they implement AI technologies without adequate safeguards. So these lawsuits serve as warnings that district policies and practices must evolve as rapidly as generative AI technology itself. These lawsuits have to do with deepfake pornographic images, academic dishonesty, and student privacy. So we're going to cover several issues in this section, but I'll try to be brief. First, in Pennsylvania late last year, parents filed a lawsuit against a school after a student allegedly created explicit deepfake images of nearly 50 female classmates. So deepfakes, of course, are they're hyper-realistic, but AI-generated content that may depict photos, videos, or audio that didn't actually take place. The lawsuit alleges that the creation of the deepfakes was reported through an official portal in November 2023, which is about a year before the lawsuit was filed. And then for several months, school officials failed to properly investigate or notify authorities. The plaintiffs allege that the school's delayed response violated mandatory reporting laws, and as you can imagine, there's a bit of an uproar. It resulted in the resignations of the school's head and board president and a bunch of other issues. So this lawsuit highlights how schools have to address the growing problem of AI-facilitated sexual harassment that target students, particularly female students. Districts have to recognize that the creation of deepfakes of minors requires immediate reporting to law enforcement, and that if there are inadequate response protocols, that can lead to legal liability. I'm gonna due to time constraints, I'm gonna move on to the next lawsuit. So moving on to academic dishonesty. There's a federal lawsuit in Massachusetts that was filed last October, which in or around last October, which arose after a school disciplined a high school student for using AI to generate content for an AP US history project. I believe the issue is that he copied and pasted generative content, which included fabricated citations. So naturally, the parents filed a federal lawsuit against the school. And their primary allegation was that the school, or one of their allegations was that the school didn't have a proper AI policy in place and that it didn't provide adequate guidance about AI usage before disciplining their son. They filed a motion for a preliminary injunction, which would have required the school to remove the detention from the student's disciplinary record and to raise his AP US history grade. The court denied the motion and showed a lot of deference to the school officials' disciplinary decisions. However, the plaintiff's attorney declared that the case is going to continue, so they're going to go through discovery, which some of you may know is a potentially lengthy and costly process. So this is a warning that even if courts say, okay, we're going to defer to administrative judgment here, schools have to proactively address students' AI usage by developing comprehensive, formally adopted AI policies that clearly define like what's permitted, what's not permitted in terms of the use of AI tools. And then lastly, just a few weeks ago, a group of parents filed a federal lawsuit alleging that Google's Workspace for Education products, which includes Google Classroom and Google Gemini, and is used by a large number of school districts, like secretly track students' online activities across various websites and applications. According to the lawsuit, Google creates individual digital fingerprints by collecting names, location, email content, browsing history, potentially even from students under 13 years old. Google denies these claims, but still the case raises really critical questions about the privacy implications of educational technology platforms on which many districts rely. This should remind districts of their fundamental responsibility, as we discussed earlier, to protect student data privacy when implementing technology solutions. Now, this case is relatively new, so we're still kind of looking into the implications of the lawsuit, but for present purposes, suffice it to say that it would be prudent for districts to proactively review their vendor agreements, documenting parental consent procedures, and considering whether there are alternative options that might better protect student privacy. These are just 3 lawsuits on 3 different topics, and there are other lawsuits which you may have heard of, like New York Times copyright lawsuit against OpenAI. But I thought that these 3 lawsuits are some of the most relevant to school districts right now. So for better or for worse, we know there's going to be additional lawsuits down the line. So definitely stay tuned for updates on the litigation front.
Thanks, Alex. I know that was a burning question on many people's minds: is where are the lawsuits? Who's getting sued? So this is our last prepared question before we open it up to audience questions, which you can use, again, the Q&A feature to submit. We're going to talk about policymaking, and I want to make a quick plug here for folks to take a look at CSBA's sample policies available to Gamut subscribers. CSBA has revised a number of policies to include AI-related language, such as employee and student use of technology, academic honesty, and student assessment, just to name a few. And there are, of course, more still to consider, but that's, that gets us started. And on that note, Gretchen, what advice would you give school boards developing their AI-related policies?
Thank you. So I do a lot of this work in working with school districts and county offices on policy development. And my advice is some guardrails are better than nothing. Some school districts are saying there's so much information out there. Let's wait and see what happens. Let's study this for a year or two. For all the legal reasons we've already talked about, I think it's really important to have some guardrails and expectations put in place, whether it's a policy or it's expectations. And definitely the CSBA model policy is a great place to start. My recommendation is to get a stakeholder group. This is not just, I'm being sarcastic here, it's not just the IT guys issue. You know, this is something that impacts your labor groups. We have demands to bargain use of AI. This impacts business operations, special education, everything we've talked about. So representatives from each of those groups should be, you should have an AI summit or workshop where you come up with a draft model policy. Maybe you start with CSBAs and you talk about what is important to your district. What are the expectations within your district? And it may take a few meetings before you present it to the board with a recommendation. Now, you as an IT professional might be very knowledgeable and you might be the primary resource, but you really need to include all areas of district operations. Now, when you look at a CSBA model policy or any of your model policies and you scroll to the end, there's a whole laundry list of federal and state statutes. In my opinion, school board policies are founded on the legal requirements. And so I have boiled down the 7 or 8 most key critical legal concepts, which highlights most of what we've talked about already today. But I think these are sort of the basis of your policy and are really important to include in there. So I will zip through them really quickly. One is equity, which we've talked about, whether it's making sure we have future ready learners. Like I talked about, there's an executive order now, it's come on down from high. AI is critical. So we need it equitably available to students, also special education considerations. The second piece we've talked about is bias. Your staff, if they are using this for developing lesson plans or translation services, it's being big for translation. Well, there's a lot of cultural bias that could be misinterpreted. You need that human in the loop to make sure that these documents are free of bias. Accuracy is another piece for teachers creating lesson plans. They still need to do a human review. It still has to align with your curriculum standards. So equity, bias, accuracy. I talked at length about data privacy evaluation. Your policy should include whatever your process is or a reference that all tools need to be reviewed for data privacy. Another one is when parent permission is required. And I saw we got a question in the chat about a model parent permission form. Happy to share that, but reminding staff that the parent permission may need to be acquired if student records are going to be reshared outside of the school community. Evaluate duty to bargain. Again, that is a hot topic going around the labor groups. And then the prohibition on misconduct, which is what you were just talking about. You know, your cyber citizenship curriculum may need to be updated to include things like how to spot misinformation, have a prohibition on deep fakes, academic integrity. All of that can be built into the AI policy about, you know, expectations for students. And then finally, one kind of spin-off topic that's come up quite a bit recently that we're creating, I don't know if it's a standalone policy or guidelines, is the use of AI note taker is becoming ubiquitous in school operations. But we're also seeing it used in like confidential settlement conferences for special education. California is a 2-party consent state. If you're using AI note taker, which I know some of people on this group are, because I saw it in the chat, you're supposed to get permission. And so what does a school district protocol look like? What are the expectations that if somebody is going to bring an AI note taker to a meeting, when do you give notice? When do you get their consent? I think it's becoming a really hot topic. And so maybe over the summer, that's something you evaluate going into next school year. So you can have sort of a protocol and expectations. I'm not saying you can't use it. I'm just saying there are notice and consent requirements. I know I zipped through that very quickly. We are providing a ton of resources through CSBA and CSBA's model policy. And of course, anybody's always welcome to ask some follow-up questions.
Thanks, Gretchen. Alex, final thoughts on AI policy?
Yeah, just real quickly, I totally agree that districts need to have safeguards in place with regard to the use of generative AI, and all stakeholder groups need to be included in the discussion. Policies should explicitly address the topics mentioned earlier while being flexible enough to adapt as technologies evolve. And I think that's a really important point to remember. Once your district gets around to adopting an AI policy, like you're not done, right? Like you need to engage in regular policy review and continuous improvement. Like the technology landscape is just changing so quickly for policies to remain effective if they aren't reviewed and up-to-dated on a somewhat regular basis. And then one word about professional development, like even the most well-crafted policies are not effective unless you have proper implementation through a comprehensive PD and training. Staff at all levels have to understand how to identify potentially AI-generated content and follow the appropriate verification protocols.
Thanks, Alex. All right, time for audience questions. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. And thank you, panelists, for all of your thoughtful, prepared answers.
All right, so I'm going to go through the what we have in the Q&A. We've got a few of them answered already. So if you haven't taken a look at what's been shared, please go ahead and take a look there. So I'll just throw the first one out here. This is around PII. So if a student uses a district email or a personal email to sign up, isn't that PII? I think all the services require an email address. Wouldn't this eliminate all AI tools that haven't signed the SDPA?
I spent 2 hours with Amazon yesterday going over this exact question. It was like a whole team of lawyers. Because then how do you have AI in district operations? It's a real challenge. So email addresses often fall under the directory information exemption to FERPA, but even then parents have the right to opt out. So it does present a lot of issues, and it's something we would typically contract around. But I think, I'd welcome any of the other attorneys on the call to weigh in on this as well. But I think that I think it's inevitable that email addresses will probably be uploaded, and it's going to fall under that directory information under FERPA. But it's a really complex and challenging issue to navigate around.
All right, anybody else wants to jump in, please? Okay, so moving on to the next question. If the data do not leave the district network, does that convert an open AI source into a closed AI source?
Well, I'll jump in, but yeah, I mean, generally so with data privacy, there's kind of two pieces of it. One is kind of the normal account sign up stuff that Gretchen was talking about, and the transmission of data. So like kids typing in and then that data going somewhere. That's kind of issue one. And so theoretically, like Alex was talking about, if you have a model living on your server, none of that data is leaving your network, you have no concerns, right? Fully compliant. The other piece of this that Gretchen was talking about was basically, and I think we have like a couple questions on this. Like the AI labs can use user inputs and the documents you give during a chat to train the model. So like what I was talking about with post-training, where they take your input and the model's response, and they use that to improve the model. Theoretically, that training process, like I was saying, the models don't memorize answers. There's not a big database of that stuff. But theoretically, during that process, the model is learning the information that you put in the input. It's learning it. So if you're putting in, PII, any specific details and stuff, theoretically, the model can learn that. Again, it's probably not going to memorize it, but it could start to ingest those details. So this is kind of a separate issue from the data transmission piece. So the model learning off of user inputs is kind of a separate thing that you need to think about with kind of each different service that you're using. So like OpenAI, for example, has the do not train on my data button. So theoretically, you hit that, and they're not going to use your user prompts for data training. Anthropic by default doesn't train on user data. There's no opt-out because they just don't do it. Meta and Google by default, Meta in particular, refuses to not train on your data. So there is no opt-out. They just always train on your data because that's just how they work. So it's kind of like, you know, company by company, system by system, you need to think about what your data is being used for.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. By all means, if anybody else wants to jump in on any of these, please just go right ahead. So the next question is, if these large language models are like a black box, how can a school district safeguard students from bias?
I can say a couple of things. This question is so important because of the black box aspect of AI. If I can illustrate a couple of ways that AI systems might demonstrate bias in the educational context, like think about an AI system that makes recommendations to students about course pathways or academic programs, and an AI tool might provide different guidance to different students based on students' cultural markers, like maybe even suggesting more rigorous courses to students who indicate interest in extracurricular activities that are stereotypically associated with higher socioeconomic backgrounds. So school districts can thoroughly evaluate AI tools before implementation and focus on potential biases and equity concerns. Also specifically examine how AI systems perform across different demographic groups and cultural contexts, and requiring vendors to be transparent, to demand transparency about their data sources and their algorithmic design. We spoke earlier about engaging stakeholders, including students, parents, and educators from different backgrounds. I think it would be important to ensure that the group of stakeholders is diverse in many different ways, to ensure that you have that input from those members of the school community. This type of evaluation is really critical because many AI systems can perpetuate existing societal biases. Comprehensive professional development and training would be important also. A lot of district administrators may lack the technical expertise to identify potential bias in AI systems without proper guidance. And then lastly, again, we advocate for establishing clear AI usage policies with an eye towards equity.
Yeah, that's a particularly tricky area. I know even for our small members in particular, managing that is a headache, to put it mildly. So this next question is that kind of goes. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to jump in on that because one thing you can do too is like Alex was saying, it's and like Andrew, you're saying, like monitoring for bias, like to the question, like you can't be certain. So it's a question of monitoring in the first place. But what a lot of companies will do is red teaming. So they will have teams try to get the model to produce bias outputs so that they can see that and then try to make adjustments. So one thing I've included in contracts with AI systems like Magic Schools is like a requirement for them to do some sort of red teaming beforehand to identify bias in the first place. And then in the second place, if a teacher or student or something comes across a biased output, have a system in place to flag that and take that back to Magic Schools for them to adjust their system, put in guardrails. I know Magic Schools just uses OpenAI anyway, so there's not much you can do there. And part of that too, there's a difference in how much you can do contractually with these different companies, because there's OpenAI and there's Anthropic and Google, and then there's Magic AI, which just uses OpenAI and Anthropic as a backend. So there's only, if you're dealing with Magic Schools, there's only so much you can do in that contract, because ultimately they're not the model provider. So that's something you need to think through too when you're dealing with contracts. Okay.
Yeah, there's layers and layers to this as you start to dig deeper. It's exciting and fun, I'm sure. And there's another question here, and Nick, I think I'll throw this to you because it goes back to the prior question about toggling learning on and off. So the question is, does toggling improve the model for everyone to off? Does that stop the model from using or sharing data to train its system? I believe you answered that, but we can just recap.
Yeah. So theoretically, and part of this is, do you trust OpenAI? But toggle that button, they're not going to train on your data. But you still have all the first order problems of transmitting data in the first place. But yes, turning that off, theoretically, it turns it theoretically into a closed model, as Gretchen was talking about.
Yeah. Thank you. So the next is a question. I think we can answer this, but Tempestt, this is, I think, for you, whether you could list the tools and models that you spoke about. And I think we can send that out if you're able to share that.
Yeah, because there are a lot of tools out there. So, and I've spoken about a number of them. So I don't know what the best way to do that. Do you just want a list of all the tools? I mean, there, there are so many. Or would it be more helpful to whoever asked that to send like the specific tools they're looking for, whether they're ESL or grammar or, for visual learners? I don't know what how the best way to approach that question.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think it'd be up to you if there's any that you want to flag, or just the list that you mentioned would be certainly be valuable. And then for folks listening, we'll put contact information at the end so you can pester our panelists here directly with those questions to maybe get some specifics, or take them on as a.
And I would include a disclaimer as to whether or not those have actually been reviewed for data privacy and safety purposes. Like if you've reviewed them and you think they're great and you want to recommend them, but there's so many tools out there, but that doesn't mean they've necessarily been, like just because we're lawyers doesn't mean we're putting a rubber stamp on them and saying they're safe to use in schools.
Correct.
Yeah, great point. And that's what I would expect our lawyers to advise us on in this manner. So, and that's one of the questions that we think about with sample policies too. It's what kind of guidance, can we provide without endorsing any of these tools? Because ultimately it's going to come down to what you have, what your agreements are locally, and we want to respect that. That's our whole philosophy at CSBA. So moving on to, I think we got a couple more questions. Do you have any recommended language for AI policies specifically addressing academic integrity? And I'll just preface this with reference to gamut policies. So CSBA does provide a number of sample policies, and there's more coming that do include AI language. There is not yet an AI policy per se. We've integrated AI into a number of policies, and we've got that on the csba.org/AI website. But is there any specific language that might be valuable to consider around academic integrity at a high level?
So, and I think it's in the student acceptable use of technology policy under CSBA. And I think that's exactly where this fits. Academic integrity, I mean, generally what it's going to, typically what they say is, generative AI should not be used to create educational content or be used to do assignments unless specifically permitted by your teacher. I mean, it's usually, or by the course, it's either course by course or teacher by teacher. And so the policy language is usually pretty broad, because let's say you have a graphic design course, where AI could be robustly used. They need to be future ready learners. So it's course by course or teacher by teacher. So the language in the policy is usually pretty broad. It's the professional development that is really critical. So do you have AI tools to detect if students are using AI to generate their content? Some teachers are going back to handwritten essays in class to avoid academic dishonesty to write essays. Or you're using it in a positive way. Students use free ChatGPT to write your first draft of an essay, but then we want to see you edit it. But it's the professional development piece. And I forgot to mention earlier, we included it in our resources, but we have an ISTE certified AI course specific for teachers for AI use in the classroom. And so I included a flyer if that's of interest to anybody. It's professional development online program for AI training for staff. But it addresses that particular issue, as there's a whole course on it.
Thank you, Gretchen. And just as a plug for those that are gamut policy subscribers, if you haven't updated your policies, make sure you're talking with your team about whether you've done that, because those are coming fast and furious. And again, more will be coming, but please do make sure that your AI policies, or rather your sample policies, are updated so that you've got the latest and greatest from us. All right, so moving on to, I think we've got time for a couple more questions here. So what are the essential components of vetting artificial intelligence? Who needs to be involved, and what needs to happen?
I'm happy to jump in, but I know other people mentioned this also. I think it might have been Alex talked about, there's all these acronyms. Federal, it's FERPA, it's COPA, state level, it's SOPIPA. There are SOPIPA, California Ed Code. There are 9 specific terms that need to be in any educational software agreement that collects educational records or pupil records. So what you are looking for, we have it in a checklist. There's also a model data privacy agreement that a software provider may have signed off on. So, I think Site provides this model data privacy agreement. So you either have a system where you require all your vendors district-wide to sign off on a model data privacy agreement, or you have a department, someone in business, someone in IT, who's going through these ed tech terms and conditions and making sure that California's law, so PIPA, I think it's Student Online Privacy and Information Protection Act, that those 9 key elements are in there. So there's checklists, there's model policies, but you certainly don't want to be putting tools in the hands of students that are not compliant with California Education Code, because you're going to have parent lawyers come after you for violating their kids' data privacy. So it's pretty critical.
All right, I think I've got we'll take 2 more, just kind of be aware of time here, but if there's any other questions, please feel free to add them. We have a few extra minutes. This question is around open versus closed. So I've recently learned that open AI versus closed AI has to do with the model's code and architecture being shared rather than whether or not information is being shared. For data privacy, we want to focus on terms like data training. Does that sound correct?
So I can just do this real quick, because it is correct, and we've kind of used the term open and closed during this presentation a little bit differently than what you've probably seen like in technical world. But yes, there's open source software, there's closed source software. Closed source software is proprietary software. It's most of the software you touch in the world. It is, you know, the company they write the code, they own the code, you never see the code. Open source software is software that's freely available, generally free as in speech, not as in beer, where people can take it, modify it, use it on their own. So most of the AI models that you touch, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, all of them, those are all closed source models. They're proprietary. You can never touch them. Meta AI, DeepSeek, the Mistral models, those are all open source. So anybody can take those, and technically they're open weights, which is a whole other thing, but technically you can take those models, modify them, do fine-tune training on your own, and critically run them on your own hardware. So like what Alex was talking about, on-premises AI, generally you're unless you're going to train a model yourself, you're going to use an open source model for that purpose. And then what the difference is, what Gretchen was talking about was just kind of the data privacy, thinking about open being they're going to train on your data. So the data you put in could theoretically go out into other people's responses, versus closed, meaning they're not going to train on your data. I hope that clarifies that piece.
Yeah, that's a tricky distinction, and it's for those of us who are in the IT space in our prior lives, it's still never 100% clear, you know, whether it's open source versus an open model, and what do you mean by that? All right, so I've got one last quick question, and this is just a kind of a technical term, just to recap. What is red teaming? Can you describe that a little bit more?
Okay, sorry. I'll try not to, well, we're done, so I can't introduce new terms. But red teaming is basically the idea that like before a new model is released, what like OpenAI will do is they'll hire people to test the model and try to get it to do bad things. They'll try to get it to make a nuclear bomb, or they'll try to make it to generate a new virus or something. So this process is basically just pushing the model to its limits to see that it's going to refuse these requests, right? And bias is part of that too. So they do this kind of process, and then they use the results from that to adjust the model to hopefully not let it do those things. So that's red teaming. And you can build kind of those kinds of protections in the contracts too, particularly around bias is what I've done before.
All right. Well, thank you for this robust discussion and for sticking around and answering our questions. This part of this is, you know, is head spinning. Well, part of it. A lot of it is head spinning for our members, and for, you know, even for staff who are kind of getting our, you know, our bearings around this and what it means for trustees and school systems at large throughout the state. So if you're feeling like your head is spinning at a, you know, different rate than it was before, I think that's normal, and it's to be expected. But it's part of the reason why we partner with the folks that you see on the call today, to get you that expert counsel when you need it, and help answer and untangle some of the really tricky questions around this. So with that, we'll go ahead and close out. And I always want to point folks to our website. Well, number one, we got our contact information for the panel here. So we'll leave this up for just a moment so you all can copy these down and start to reach out as you need, or if you have questions. But Tempestt, Alex, Gretchen, Nick, thank you so much for your time today. I know it's valuable, and it's really great to hear this perspective and to give folks a little more confidence either in moving forward with this, or at least confidence to ask some better questions of their IT team or their vendors or folks who are providing information about artificial intelligence to them. It's hugely valuable. So again, just a quick plug for our website, which includes a lot of resources. More is coming online in the coming months from the AI task force, but it's csba.org/AI. And just wrap up here, the recording, as a reminder, will be sent to you all along with some of the resources talked about today, along with some of those that you've asked in the chat. We'll include other materials from the law firm partners you've heard from today. And then just last thing I want to plug, another webinar from the AI task force is coming up on June 10th at 11 a.m. And that'll be with SITE, that's the California IT and Education. That's the professional association for IT professionals in California in the school system. So stay tuned for that. Watch your inboxes. You'll get a notification that's coming up in some of our communications. Again, that's June 10th at 11 a.m. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and say thank you once again for our panelists and for Ann for our moderating. It's been a very informative discussion, and it continues to be. So we look forward to having you and having our members having access to you. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.